What makes a good game? In our current society, video games have solidified their place in everyday activities. Even the well-adjusted and successful make time to play a good game of Candy Crush. It's hard to find someone who hasn't indulged in at least one video game in their lives. But with this massive influence that video games have across the globe, it begs us to ask, what qualities make a good game? Let's say you're just an average Joe. Your primary gaming experience is watching your buddy play an online PvP and loudly cursing while you just awkwardly twiddle your thumbs in the background. Then, by some twist of fate, a gaming console falls into your grubby little hands. What game do you get? Well, there's a lot to consider when getting a game. Do you want a first-person shooter, an RPG, a sandbox game, a real-time strategy game, a rhythm game, an action-adventure game, simulation and sports, survival, beat-em-ups, an MMO, a survival horror game? Point is, there's a lot of video games out there. With such a broad scope of games that you could be investing your time and money into, you want to make sure you get one that gives you a lasting experience. You want a timeless game that is equally enjoyable for old and new players. You want a game that has a fleshed out world with a wide array of activities to keep you entertained outside of the main story. You want a game with its own personality, setting it apart from other games you could be playing. You want a game that knows when to take itself seriously, yet isn't so serious that it refuses to have fun. You, my friend, want to play the Yakuza series. The Yakuza series is a rather renowned title. With how unique and hyperbolic many of its features are, you've probably seen a few memes that revolve around it. And it's understandable. Many aspects of this game are ridiculous. Even something as simple as going to a telephone club is wildly exaggerated. You play as Kiryu Kazuma, a Yakuza member that follows his own strict honor code and sense of justice. He fights for what he thinks is right while combating a multitude of enemies, ranging from deadly Yakuza leaders who will do anything for power to a giant squid. With 8 games and several spin-offs, Yakuza has seen groundbreaking success, each title receiving high praise and nearly 14 million sales across all platforms. From the beginning, the series marked a shift in what games could be about and who could play them, challenging standards in the early industry. The Yakuza series was conceptualized by Toshihiro Nagoshi in 2005, a difficult year for the games producing company Sega. At the time, Sega had to compete with the rise of American game studios like Activision and Blizzard, as well as local competition like Nintendo. In an attempt to keep up with the rising competition, they released their own console, the Sega Dreamcast, which ended up being a huge failure. Everything was looking downhill for the company, but Nagoshi, who was a developer at the time, came up with the idea of a beat-em-up style game that revolves around the Yakuza, Japan's dark criminal underbelly. As with most great ideas, this was shot down immediately due to its adult themes and controversial topics. At the time, games were targeted towards younger audiences, expected to primarily be enjoyed by children, so a game that talked about the gritty criminal underworld in Japan was not expected to be well received. Additionally, Yakuza wanted to include combat against real people. Games around this era allowed violence against robot/humanoid creatures, but the idea of fighting actual human beings was considered a taboo subject at the time. Things seemed as though they wouldn't be working in Nagoshi's favor. But, in a show of passion and faith, he went directly to Sega's higher-ups and declared that if Yakuza wasn't successful, he would leave his job and never return to the company. And wouldn't you know it, Yakuza was crazy successful! By opening the gaming experience to an entirely new demographic, one that didn't have to ask to buy a video game, Sega ended up making a massive hit that saw huge sales. Outside of reaching a new audience, though, what made Yakuza such a huge success? Well, the biggest factors and features of the game that led to its success are as follows: the world building, the personality, and the management of tone. To begin, Yakuza has some extremely dense world building, offering a wide variety of activities and sub-stories that help flesh out both the environment and the characters. With most games that offer an open world experience, the goal is usually to make that world as large and vast as possible. However, a problem that comes with this is that it ultimately ends up feeling very empty. I've encountered this with some of the open world games I've played: Horizon, Breath of the Wild, Minecraft, all wonderful titles that boast about how large their space is. But whenever I've played them, after a while, everything feels so lonely. Once you stray to an area that isn't rife with enemies or wildlife to interact with, it all feels empty and lifeless. Yakuza offers a solution to that existentiality that comes with vast open-world games. Instead of being allowed to run around as you please, the majority of the Yakuza series takes place in a small city district called Kamurocho. It's bustling with busy crowds, barkers, street ruffians, stumbling drunks, and countless other things that you could expect to see in a real city. Every street you go to is filled with people who are going about their daily business, making the area feel real and alive. To add to the liveliness of the world, as you're roaming Kamurocho, you'll likely run into a sub-story. These are side quests that are triggered when you go to a random location and a cutscene interrupts your casual stroll around town. You'll act as a bystander, generally getting a scope of the situation before thinking to yourself, maybe I should do something about that. From here, you can either engage or just walk away until you revisit the site and get thrown off by the fact that you're suddenly in a quest that you completely forgot about. Most of these quests are pretty straightforward, each offering a simple story that pertains to the civilians of Kamurocho and the shenanigans of their everyday lives. You might get into a brawl or two, but ultimately, they don't give you prizes like the side quests of another game would. This is part of what makes Yakuza so unique. If you are playing something like Breath of the Wild, you'd likely indulge in a side quest because you heard about some sweet loot that's waiting for you at the end. But in Yakuza, you don't get any big shiny treasure chests when you follow a separate storyline. Instead, you get the reward of character development. With each sub-story you complete, you get to see a bit more of Kiryu's personality and beliefs as he looks up to the sky and ponders what lesson this encounter taught him. Some stories can even develop into more extensive plots, in contrast with the short and sweet ones that you run into the most. For example, in Yakuza 6, Kiryu finds himself being guilted into becoming the captain for an amateur baseball team, making him responsible for both playing on the team and managing the lineup of players. Through the sub-story, you gradually watch as a simple side quest turns into a full-blown shonen sports anime. These sub-stories feel as though an immaculate sense of care was put into each detail of the game, working as a vessel for Kiryu's personality and morals to really shine. Even if those morals involve giving a porn magazine to a child. Many aspects of this game are extremely ridiculous. But that brings us to our second point: personality. One of the things that really made Yakuza stand out in the game market was its personality. It never shied away from absurdity. It was one of the things that first drew me to the series in the first place. The comical exaggeration that's associated with the series has captivated so many players, making it an incredibly memorable experience for whoever decides to pick up the game. On my first playthrough of Yakuza 0, I couldn't get enough of the bizarreness that was being thrown at me without warning, and this continues throughout every installment of the series. There are some sub-stories that carry this essence of eccentricity, such as the adult babies that show up in multiple games and demand to kick your ass, the dominatrix that you have to publicly roleplay with so she gets better at her job, and, whatever this is. These only scratch the surface as well, as there are around 100 sub-stories per game, each carrying a bit of this absurdity. The personality reaches past simple sub-stories, though. That same lighthearted ridiculousness is embedded into the characters themselves. Kiryu is a big, buff, beautiful Yakuza, and yet he routinely makes times to sing his heart out at karaoke and do a little jiggy on a Friday night. Even in the heat of battle, the game goes out of its way to hit you with exaggerated and almost cartoonish violence. No matter the player, I can't imagine a single person who wouldn't at least smile at what this game has to offer. However, this is a game about a world of organized crime. You're not just running around and guffawing at the sudden gags that you stumble upon. There's still a darker foundation that this is all set upon. So it begs the question: how does Yakuza balance between its absurdist humor and its heavier themes without it feeling awkward? That's where we enter our third point: the management of tone. One of the main things that makes Yakuza shine against its competitors is how perfectly it balances its lighthearted and serious themes. This game manages to use dissonance to its advantage, something that I don't usually see in these type of free roam games. There is something so jarring about running around and replaying the same karaoke minigame over and over to watch the silly little eye patch man dance in his silly little suit, and then once I'm done, I'm greeted with a scene that legitimately terrified me. But somehow, that drastic shift lends itself perfectly to the game. It's one of the few instances that I've seen dissonance being utilized effectively. For other crime-based open-world games, namely GTA, there's a tremendous contrast between your actions as the character and how the game wants you to perceive the character. GTA will portray its main characters in a sympathetic light, trying to get you to connect and feel for them. However, it's difficult to feel any sort of compassion for them when you were just playing as the same character and running down civilians for the hell of it. Yakuza doesn't let you run around and do as you please. You can't just sporadically throw punches at a random businessman that's going about his day. You're a citizen of Kamurocho, and you will respect each citizen that isn't involved in your criminal circle. Due to this constriction, due to the fact that you still have to abide by certain rules, it makes it easier to connect with Kiryu, even when you're left to your own devices. Every wacky sub-story ultimately falls in line with Kiryu's personality and beliefs. Even when you're beating up a gang of punks on the street, you only did it because someone else needed help. Dissonance is used as an advantage in the series. The contrast between the storyline and open-world activities don't undermine the character's motives, personality, origins, etc., etc. You're given both a compelling story and an enjoyable independent experience. You get the best of both worlds without Kiryu feeling any less sincere because of your actions. This series has managed to make me lose my mind at a telephone club minigame before leaving me on the verge of tears because of its tragic love story, and not once did it feel like it was any less meaningful just because I stopped for a side quest. Obviously though, no game is perfect, and some players will complain about certain aspects of the series. The biggest flaw that people point out is that almost every game is the same. Each one brings a different storyline that expands the world of Japan's organized crime, but there's nothing fundamentally new from game to game. You still beat up hooligans, you still engage in bizarre side quests, and you still sing your heart out at karaoke. There's nothing that drastically changes in each game, and that's entirely fair. Not everyone can handle the same thing over and over. People want variety in what they play, and the Yakuza series can't really offer that. However, this repetitiveness can work as an advantage as well. Personally, I love the fact that it's the same thing over and over again. I love that I can watch the characters I'm so attached to go through new intense plots and shirtless skirmishes, but I can still watch Kiryu stumble into the familiar shenanigans of a sudden sub-story. I love watching how these characters interact with every situation, even if it's not necessarily new or different. It fills that void you feel when you finish a game and realize that it's the end of the story, that there's no new developments and the game is done. With a series that tells new stories but fundamentally stays the same, you get to watch the same characters you know and love endure new challenges while not being jarringly different from the last installment. Some people also complain about the reuse of assets. But it never really bothered me outside of a quick chuckle when I notice it. If anything, it shows that the resources were instead allocated to more important scenes and functions. Would you rather have an impeccably detailed and animated cutscene at the expense of a few sound effects being reused? Or would you rather have production slowed and an overall lower quality because you wanted a new sound effect for punching a guy? Overall, I genuinely believe that the Yakuza series is an outstanding series that everyone should play. It has an incredible array of features that every player can find joy in one way or another. The condensed world building, profound personality, and perfect utilization of tone makes it one of the best games that you could ever pick up. Regardless of what kind of games you gravitate towards, Yakuza has something for every player. So, in this vast and terrifying world, allow yourself to indulge in an absolutely masterful experience for a few hours. Go play Yakuza.